readers, have you ever gone back and rewatched an episode, a pilot episode of a TV show that was one of your favorites, or reread the first book in a series that you really fell in love with? So I did that last night with the Harry Potter series, and I went back and read the very first part of the book again. And in the very beginning, there's this scene where Hagrid delivers Harry to his relative's house on the flying motorcycle, and Dumbledore asks him where he got it. And he says, borrowed it, Professor Dumbledore, sir. Borrowed it from young Sirius Black, lent it to me. I stopped and I thought, wait a minute. I don't remember Sirius Black being mentioned in the first book. That's odd. I could have sworn he wasn't even mentioned until book 3. But all of a sudden, there he was in the first book. And it was like J.K. Rowling had left us little hints and little threads of things early on that ended up being really important later. So the same thing happens in literary nonfiction books that you're reading now. Authors are going to have parts across the book that you don't realize are connected until much later. And that kind of makes it challenging reading. And in nonfiction, it also makes it challenging for note-taking. So I want you to stop for a moment and think, what is going to be challenging about taking notes when authors hint at something, then drop it, and then return to it much later in the book? So stop and think for a minute. So I hope one of the things that you came up with when you were stopping and doing your thinking was creating notes that make sense while you're reading. So today I want to teach you that, like great fiction writers, great literary nonfiction writers won't present all their ideas at once. Instead, they're going to introduce something and then maybe leave it for a little bit, and then they're going to return back to it later. So this means that readers need to figure out ways to take notes that are going to allow them to keep track of important information. So let's look at this. Our teaching point today is readers figure out ways to take notes that allow them to trace multiple ideas and keep track of important information. All right, so let's see what this work looks like. So last night I realized that because the author of Hidden Figures does the same brilliant and challenging work that J.K. Rowling does, she hints at something new, then comes back to it much later. My notes were becoming a jumbled mess of ideas and themes and issues, and they weren't helping me to really think more deeply about my book. So I want you to look at my original notes pages. They're really, I just go chapter by chapter, right? So setting the scene, hundreds of women worked, and then I kind of jotted down the important women, and then the racial discrimination, women's job opportunities. So all of these things are part of my notes. So then I tried rearranging my notes, not into chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, but in ways that are going to help me track the bigger points in the text and some of the related smaller points or subtopics. So here are my revised notes. Now, I want you to study these notes for a minute and see if you can name what I did in ways that would help you do the same thing as a reader. So I want you to stop and think for a minute. Okay, so after studying my notes for a few minutes, I want to point out some things. I want to see if you noticed these things. Um, so one of the things that I did was I added key details to support each point. So right here, you can see that I talked about segregated sections on buses, libraries, movies. And another thing that I want you to note that I did was I notated where I found that. So I actually found that in the movie. And then, so let's look at something else. I grouped my information into bigger categories. So my big category is discrimination and how widespread discrimination was. So I've got that. And then the other thing I want you to really note, and I'm going to slide this up a little bit. I want you to note that my notes are brief. They're in kind of incomplete sentences, but I am giving page numbers. So notice the women at NACA were called computers and not mathematicians. They were paid less. Now look also where I have come up with my possible theme. My possible theme is hard work is not always equally rewarded. And I've got two different things that kind of point me in this direction. The first one is they were called computers and they were paid less. And then the second is Black teachers made half the money of their low paid white colleagues. And so now I've got two examples that kind of support my theme. Hard work is not always equally rewarded. Okay, so I want you to stop and I want you to think about how could you organize your notes that you've been taking in a way that might make it easier to keep track of these themes and issues going across the text and throughout the book. I will show you some examples that I have that will allow you to do this. If you'll look, the first one I have is found on your learning plan, on your choice board. And it looks like this. And basically at the top, it reminds you what a theme is. It reminds you what a central idea is. And it kind of talks to you about what social issues are. So this is just a tracking sheet. Just as you're reading, you can jot it down and keep your thoughts. And the reason I chose this is you're going to kind of label what is it that's addressed, what is the evidence to support it, and what are your thoughts, and what is the page number. Now, the next piece of information I have to help you organize this after you've kept it in this tracker is this sheet. So this allows you to go through and find what are some of my central ideas, what are some of my themes, what are some of my social issues, what are the anecdotes that help support this. So this is another graphic organizer that you could choose to use if you wanted to help keep track of that. So these are just a couple of examples of note-taking methods that you can choose. You don't have to use them. I would recommend using them. The way this second one is meant is to pull everything from this one and kind of organize it in here, because in here, it's just going to be in a list-like way. But we can take that list and we can better organize it into sections. So that's kind of what I would recommend for you to do. Now, so let's look. Today, we were looking at organizing notes in a way that helps us track the various categories, subtopics, or points. So one way that you've already learned is to annotate and use margin notes to connect parts. If you can't annotate in your book, you might use sticky notes to do that annotation and leave it in your book. I would recommend, though, to write your page notes down. Reorganize and revise your notes. This also kind of helps you remember things as you're reading. that you thought were important early on and see if you see those things pop up again. And then the last one is to create new sections or summaries. So do that, create new sections. I'm sure that as I continue to go through this text and I continue to read, that I am going to find more big ideas than discrimination was widespread. Or I might find other ways that discrimination was widespread. So I'm going to continue to build on this. So as you're going off to do your reading today, think about what your note-taking method could be. And you can also talk with your teacher if you have ideas about ways you'd like to take notes. And it's a little bit different for everyone. So good luck with your reading and have a great rest of your day.